All right, so we talked about the hypothalamus, we talked about the pituitary, we talked about the thyroid gland, we talked about the parathyroid glands. Now we're going to talk about the adrenal glands. We have two adrenal glands, and the name Adrenal tells you where they are. Right? What does renal refer to? Kidneys. So the adrenal glands lie on top of each kidney. They're little like yellow pyramid-shaped glands that sit retroperitoneal, so back behind the peritoneal cavity right here, in the lower back area. Now when we look at the adrenal glands, they're broken up into two distinct regions. The adrenal cortex, which is on the outside, and the adrenal medulla, which is on the inside. When we look at the adrenal cortex, it stores tons of lipids. So cholesterols, free fatty acids, very, very lipidy. That's why when we look at the adrenal glands, we say that they're yellow. They actually appear yellow. And in most pictures and models, you'll see that we make them yellow because of all of these lipids that we have stored out in that outer cortex. Now we have those lipids there for a reason. When we look at the adrenal cortex, it manufactures lots and lots of steroid hormones. And what kind of hormones are steroids? Lipids, right? Those are lipid derivatives. So we've got a bunch of lipids there so that we can make these steroid hormones. Collectively, as a whole, we refer to these as the corticosteroids. They're steroids, and they come from the cortex. Okay, so we'll see a lot of different ones. We'll see cortisol, hydrocortisone. We'll even see like stuff like testosterone. We'll see lots of different glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, lots of them. But we've just got steroids coming from the cortex. The inner portion of the adrenal glands is referred to as the medulla. Okay, so the adrenal medulla. And this releases epinephrine and norepinephrine as hormones. And this seems weird, right? We're used to seeing epi and norepinephrine used as neurotransmitters, where they come from a neuron, they cross the synaptic cleft, and then they hit their target cell. We can also utilize them as hormones. We can put them into the bloodstream, they travel around the body, and they have a much longer effect this way. When we use them as neurotransmitters, it's instantaneous, right? And done. When we use them as hormones, they can last for several minutes, right? They last a lot longer, which several minutes is a long time for epi and norepi when we use them as hormones. The adrenal medulla is stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so there are actually sympathetic neurons that go down and innervate the adrenal gland. And when the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, we stimulate the medulla to release epi and norepi into the bloodstream. Okay, just to get kind of an extended sympathetic response. Here you see, again, this is retroperitoneal, like this is back in the body, back here. But you see both of the kidneys, and then these are showing you the adrenal glands, these little pyramids that sit on the top of each of the kidneys. Again, you'll always see them colored yellow because of all of the lipids that we have in the outer cortex. So when we look at the cortex is broken up into three smaller regions. Okay, so the adrenal glands are on top of the kidneys. They've got an outer cortex that makes steroids and an inner medulla that releases epi and norepi. When we look at the outer cortex that makes steroids, it's broken up into three regions. They're distinct structurally, and they make different hormones. The three regions, I remember them. If you work in like a doctor's office or hospital, you've probably heard the term GFR, right? It's a kidney term. What's their GFR? Which is their glomerular filtration rate. It's a really common term that's used when we talk about the kidneys. So that's the way that I remember these zones. They're from the outside in, the Zona, glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. Zona just meaning zone, right? But you can put them in order as the GFR. If I don't know what the GFR is, that doesn't help, sorry. Make up another saying. So again, looking at them, you see this is the inside, this is the outside. Okay, so this is like the capsule that goes around the outside of the adrenal gland. And we have GFR. So the zona glomerulosa, then you can see how it changes, right? This is distinctly different from this. The zona fasciculata and the zona reticularis. Again, that's all part of the outer cortex. Then on the inside, we go to the adrenal medulla. What kind of things do we make out here in the cortex? Corticosteroids. What kind of hormones are those? Lipids. What do we release from the adrenal medulla? Epinorepine. What stimulates the release of this epinorepine? Sympathetic nervous system. Good job. Okay, so the zona glomerulosa. Again, that's the outer region of the adrenal cortex, right? GFR. So the outer one we get to is the glomerulosa. The the zona glomerulosa produces mineralocorticoids. Okay, the most important of these that I want you guys to memorize is aldosterone. But look at this name. It kind of tells us something, right? What did I say? If it ends in oids, what is it normally telling us that it is? A steroid, right? So this is a steroid, which tells us it's a lipid. So that tells us quite a bit about its behavior right there. Cortico, what does that mean? Good. It comes from the cortex, right? The adrenal cortex. Mineralo, maybe has something to do with minerals of some sort, right? Ions, electrolytes, something like that. So when we look at these, the mineralocorticoids, again, specifically aldosterone. Aldosterone secretion, or aldosterone is secreted when we have a decrease in sodium, right? A decrease in blood volume, or a decrease in blood pressure, or an increase in potassium. Okay, so these are the reasons that we would secrete it. So if we have decrease in blood sodium, we release aldosterone. A decrease in blood volume, release aldosterone. Decrease in blood pressure, release aldosterone. Or too much potassium, we release aldosterone. So of course its effects are going to be the opposite of this, right? We don't have enough sodium or blood volume, so we try and reabsorb that stuff at the kidneys. Remember, at our kidneys, we're constantly filtering out the blood. We take out a bunch of ions just based on size, and we take out a bunch of fluid. And then we decide, what do we actually want to keep? And we reabsorb the stuff we actually want to keep. So aldosterone tells the kidneys, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and keep that sodium. Okay, so we reabsorb sodium. What follows sodium? Water. Okay, so that means we also reabsorb water. That fixes a few things. Reabsorbing the sodium fixes the drop in sodium. Reabsorbing the water fixes the drop in blood volume. Reabsorbing the water also fixes the drop in blood pressure. Right? More volume, more pressure. At the same time that it's doing that, what it does is it actually trades the sodium for potassium, which is a pretty common theme, right? We see that in a lot of different places, how we countertransport or we trade sodium and potassium. So as we reabsorb the sodium, we eliminate the potassium, right? Or we excrete the amount of or increase the amount of potassium that we're excreting into the urine. Those are really difficult sentences for me. It also is kind of minor. It also increases the sensitivity of salt receptors. It essentially makes you kind of crave salty food. Salty foods taste really good. So that you don't even feel like, oh man, I really feel like some chips or pretzels or whatever. That might be an aldosterone thing. Okay, so that was the zona glomerulosa, the outer part of the adrenal cortex. Next, we have the zona fasciculata, so that's the middle part of the adrenal cortex. The zona fasciculata produces glucocorticoids, right? So things like cortisol, hydrocortisone. Let's look at this name. The oids, what is that telling us? Steroid. Cortico, what is that telling us? Coming from the adrenal cortex. Gluco, what do you think it has something to do with? Huh? Glucose, right? It probably has something to do with the way that cells use glucose. So the zona fasciculata makes the glucocorticoids in response to ACTH. Where does ACTH come from? The what? Anterior pituitary, right? ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. comes from the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so ACTH comes from the anterior pituitary, comes down to the adrenal cortex, and it tells it to make glucocorticoids. These glucocorticoids, we'll talk about their like normal effects in a second, but remember that they have a negative feedback response, right? So if we have a lot of them in the blood and they make their way back up to the pituitary and the hypothalamus, they're gonna decrease the amount of CRH and ACTH that we release. Remember, the hypothalamus has CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. That goes down to the anterior pituitary, tells the anterior pituitary to release ACTH. That ACTH comes to the middle region of the adrenal cortex and tells it to release the glucocorticoids. And so that's our pathway. If we have a bunch of glucocorticoids in the bloodstream, they're going to come up and inhibit this and inhibit this, right? Because we don't want to keep stimulating them if we already have a bunch. That's that negative feedback that we keep seeing. So, what else do they do? A lot. Glucocorticoids go to the adipose tissue. What's the adipose? Fat, right? So the glucocorticoids go to the adipose tissue and they stimulate the breaking down of triglycerides into free fatty acids. So we call that lipid catabolism, right? What's catabolism? Breakdown, right? The opposite of what? Anabolism. Anabolism is building up, catabolism is breaking down. So glucocorticoids go to the fat and they cause lipid catabolism, right? They break down triglycerides into free fatty acids. These fatty acids can be used to make ATP, right? We use those for fuel. It also goes to the skeletal muscle and breaks down proteins into amino acids. So we call that protein catabolism. Again, amino acids can be used for fuels. This is weird. Right, as we go forward, we're going to see a lot of different hormones that cause the breakdown of triglycerides. It's weird for something to tell us to start breaking down our muscles. Okay, we don't do that frequently. So just kind of note that as like that's a weird feature for the glucocorticoids. So we free up fatty acids, right? And we free up amino acids. So now we have all of these other fuels that we can use for energy, right? Instead of just using glucose, like we would normally just be using the glucose, right? And then the fatty acids. But we free up a bunch of fatty acids and amino acids to use to make ATP. We call this a glucose sparing effect, right? Because we spare the glucose. We free up all these other fuels so that we can use those and we don't have to use the glucose that's there. It also accelerates glucose synthesis, and this is making completely new glucose molecules. We do this in the liver. So what happens is in the liver we can take different molecules from different components, from like different amino acids, and we can reconfigure all of this stuff and make completely new glucose molecules. So gluconeogenesis, right? Gluco like glucose, neo is new, genesis is like to create something. So creating new glucose is gluconeogenesis. So we accelerate glucose synthesis to increase the amount of glucose that we have, right? We freed up all of these other nutrients so that we could use those, so that we kind of left all of the glucose that we had available in the body. Essentially, we're mobilizing everything, right? We're mobilizing, we need more glucose. We're mobilizing fatty acids. We're mobilizing amino acids. We're like saying, holy crap, free up everything you can. Okay, so this is a stress situation. Okay, we call cortisol the stress hormone. This is when something major happens in your body and you need to, so like a really big injury occurs. And all of a sudden you're just focused on healing that major injury. You're in a super, super stressful, like sympathetic nervous system overload situation. And your body's like, all right, whatever, this is extreme, just fuel, right now. All I need is fuel, and I'll worry about my reserves later. Okay, so it frees up all of these nutrients. In the short term, this is okay, right? This is protected. There's a reason that this exists. A problem arises, though, when you have constantly high cortisol levels, when your stress hormone is high all the time, because this should not be happening all the time. You should not be burning through your reserves all the time. This should be a really short-term situation. Okay, so cortisol is good. It's helpful to get through, like if you're really sick or you get hurt or it's a really rough situation, but high cortisol levels all the time really wear your body out. Okay, and they break down all your reserves. Yes?
When you say free up, like all these nutrients, you're saying free them up to use them all,
To
right?
use them, yes.
Okay.
Yes, so break down all of your storage, all of your reserves, get broken down and you use all these things. So with the glucocorticoids, we do see that they have an anti-inflammatory effect, right? So they can stop inflammation, which we utilize pharmaceutically, right? We give cortisol, right? We give cortisol injections like to joints when we want to decrease inflammation. We give hydrocortisone to patients in creams, right? When we want to decrease like inflammation and itching and swelling in an area. And also long-term, if you're using corticosteroids for a long period of time, we see that there's immune system suppression. Sometimes beyond that, okay, we'll use that like in an autoimmune disorder. If the immune system's fighting itself, we'll try and suppress the immune system with long-term glucocorticoid therapy. Sometimes that's a bad side effect. Sometimes you will give somebody a glucocorticoid for inflammation, and then what you get long-term is that you're also suppressing their immune system. Okay, so which would be a bad thing. Overall here, guys, so glucocorticoids, I would say lipid catabolism, and know what that means. Protein catabolism, okay, know that that's a glucose-sparing effect. Gluconeogenesis, anti-inflammatory, immune system suppression. Okay, so I guess know everything. But again, this is weird. This is weird. Okay, other things don't tell your muscles to break down because you don't regularly want your muscles to start breaking down. Okay, so GFR. We had the zona glomerulosa, the zona fascicularis, and now we have, zona fasciculata, and now we have the zona reticularis. That's the innermost part of the adrenal cortex. And when we look here, again, we're going to see steroids, right? We have steroids coming from the entire cortex. That's what we call them corticosteroids. But here we see that we're producing a different kind of steroid. We're making androgens. Okay, again, this is under stimulation by ACTH. So it's the same thing, right? CRH, ACTH, glucocorticoids, and androgens. So give me an example of an androgen. The most common androgen that everybody will know, testosterone. So testosterone does not only come from the testes, okay, which is why females also have some testosterone. Females don't have nearly as much as males do, but females have testosterone, and testosterone plays a very important role in the female body as well. In the males, the androgens that come from the adrenal cortex are like useless. It just doesn't matter because the testes produce so much testosterone that it completely overflows this, and it doesn't matter. But the women don't have testes, right? So because women don't have that huge supply of testosterone, the androgens from the adrenal cortex are very important in women. Okay, so they stimulate things like muscle mass, okay, blood cell formation. Remember we said that's one of the reasons why males have that higher concentration of blood cells because of all the testosterone. We have less testosterone, so we have less red blood cell formation. And then also sex drive. Okay, androgens are very important for maintaining sex drive. So these adrenal cortex androgens are important in women for that purpose. Okay, so that's the adrenal cortex. Remember, inside the adrenal glands, we have the adrenal medulla. And this is where we make epi and norepi. time? Not good. Okay. So this is where we make epinephrine and norepinephrine, again, as hormones. So we're releasing them into the bloodstream, so that means they're going to have a really widespread effect. Epi and norepi, these are normally part of what nervous system? Sympathetic, right? We said, remember, the sympathetic neurons innervate the adrenal medulla, and when we have sympathetic activation, that's when we release this epi and norepi. So what do we call this sympathetic nervous system? Fight or flight, right? So this is stimulatory, right? This is something's going on, and I need to run, I need to fight it, I need to be active, like I need to get something done. So when we look at this, all of this should kind of make sense for fueling the body in some way. So in the muscle and liver, it triggers the breakdown of glycogen. What's glycogen?
Muscle.
It's in the muscle. Chains of glucose, right? That's how we store glucose. So, and in the liver. But remember, glucose, like if I've got a bunch of glucose, I'm going to store it as this really big molecule that's got tons and tons and tons and tons of glucose, right? It's highly branched. And we've got a bunch of glucose all linked together, and it makes this huge glycogen. So glycogen is how we store glucose. When we need that glucose, we've got to break down the glycogen. Right? Remember those hydrolysis reactions we looked at in AP1? We come in and we break that glucose off, so now I can use it. We break that one off, so now I can use it. So we come and break down this glycogen so that we can use the glucose. We call this glycogenolysis. What's lysis? To break it apart, right? So glycogen, break it apart. That's where we break apart the glycogen to free up, to free up the glucose. So then we can use that glucose to fuel the body, right? Because this is fight or flight. We need fuel. In the liver, we also make new glucose. Remember we said that that was called gluconeogenesis, right? The making of new glucose. So we free up all the glucose that we stored, we take it out of the bank, and then we start making new glucose. Again, that glucose fuels the body. The other easy fuel that we have, remember, are fats, are fatty acids. So in the adipose, which we said is what? Fat, triglycerides are broken down into free fatty acids. Hey, fatty acids, remember, are fuels. So those fatty acids are released into the bloodstream, and they can be used for ATP production. Again, remember we looked at this before, we said that's called a glucose sparing effect because it spares glucose for use by other tissues. So what we see here, guys, is all of this glucose that we free up, we mainly will use in the muscles because it's easy. It's really easy to break down and fuel our muscles. And we use it in the brain because the brain's highly glucose dependent. It just likes to use glucose. So we want to break down all of our triglycerides, free up fatty acids so that everything else can start relying on fatty acids. We want to spare the glucose for the stuff that really needs it. This is fight or flight. My brain and my muscles need to be go, 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 go. Everything else can use the fats. Okay? And then in the heart, remember we talked about this before, but epi and norepi stimulate. Right? Fight or flight, I need to fuel everything. So I increase my heart rate, I increase my force of contraction to pump a lot of blood out to the body. Notice, I'm not breaking down proteins. Okay? I'm releasing fuels. I want to release all of this fuel to energize my body, but I'm not breaking down my proteins, which makes sense, right? I need my muscles for this fight or flight thing. The last thing I want to do is be breaking down my muscles. Again, that was the weird thing about the glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids break down your muscles. Okay? This does not. Again, overall, epi and norepi cause an increased heart rate, force of contraction, blood pressure, lipid breakdown. What do we call that? Lipid catabolism. Glycogen breakdown, we call that glycogenolysis, like lysis. And increased glucose synthesis. What do we call that? Gluconeogenesis. Okay, so understand all of those terms and what they mean, because I could say increased glucose synthesis, or I could say increased gluconeogenesis. And so understand the terminology there. Well, I'm really glad that we postponed the test. I don't know what it is about this semester. I like over-explain things or something. I think whatever. I'm always like ahead normally. Okay, so that brings us to the pineal gland. The pineal gland, remember, is the back of the brain here. When we dissected the brain, remember this was like the one that I was so excited about you guys seeing like the little grain of rice poking out? Because if you came in here and you separated the cerebrum and the cerebellum, right? You come in and you separate them like that, you can peek in and you can see the pineal gland and then the superior and inferior colliculi. So it's really cool to be able to see it. But it's a really small, it's like a grain of rice, like a cooked grain of rice, attached to the top of the third ventricle, which remember is this open space down here, at the back or posterior portion of the brain. The pineal gland contains pinealocytes, and these pinealocytes make melatonin. Melatonin has a lot of kind of strange functions that we're not very sure about yet, but melatonin is important for what we call circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are like these natural cycles that we go through, these natural just kind of daily cycles. The most important or most well-known of these is our sleep cycle. So we know that melatonin is really important for kind of keeping us on this normal sleep cycle, right? There comes a time in the morning where you just naturally are going to wake up, right? And then you kind of have your energy for the day. And as the day goes on, you get more and more drowsy. And at some point, you're really tired and you're falling asleep. That's a normal cycle for us. We see that that correlates with melatonin concentrations. So what happens is our visual pathways, the nerves that take signals from the eyes and carry them back to the visual cortex in the brain, those pathways have these collaterals or little branches that will branch out and also innervate the pineal gland. So the pineal gland secretion is directly correlated with how much activity you have coming through your eyes. What we see, and there's this opposite correlation, what we see is that melatonin production is lowest during daylight hours when those pathways are really, really active. So during the day, your visual pathways are super, super active, and that somehow inhibits the pineal gland. And then your melatonin production is highest during the nighttime hours. So when your visual pathways slow down and they're not stimulated as much, then you get drowsy, right? We get an increase in melatonin production, and then that causes that drowsiness. So there's some sort of connection between melatonin and drowsiness, which is why like we sell it pharmaceutically, right? You can go to the pharmacy and buy melatonin, and they say that it promotes healthy sleep cycles. Or if you have like jet lag or a change in working hours or something, for a little while they'll recommend that you take melatonin nightly to try and kind of correct that cycle. Now, we think that melatonin may also be involved in preventing sexual maturation until puberty. So we think this for a couple of reasons. One, the pineal gland slowly shrinks and melatonin secretion declines as we head towards puberty. That's kind of like, yeah, well, maybe, but maybe that's just like a sleep thing. You know, little kids sleep more than adults do, right? So maybe that's just a growth thing. However, what we also see, and this one is kind of more important in my eyes, is that when we have pineal tumors, that can cause premature onset of puberty. So if we have tumors or issues in the pineal gland that inhibit the melatonin that it secretes, you can see puberty develop in a very, very young kid. So without melatonin, puberty develops earlier than it should. So there's some sort of correlation there between melatonin production, pineal activity, and the onset of puberty. And then we already mentioned that it influences our circadian rhythms, specifically the sleep cycles. This clock is fast.